Bullies cut the new girl's hair in class. What happened next shocked everyone. The moving truck pulled away slowly, leaving behind clouds of dust as Emily Johnson stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at her new home. It was a modest, two-story house with white siding and a small porch that creaked under the weight of her mother's hurried steps. Everything felt unfamiliar: the neighborhood, the chirping birds, the quiet streets, and the overwhelming sense that nothing would ever be the same. 13-year-old Emily had always lived in Cleveland, where the city buzzed with constant life. And her school was filled with faces she had known since kindergarten. But when her parents divorced, her world was shattered. Her mother, seeking a fresh start, decided to move them to the small town of Maplewood, Ohio, a place where everyone seemed to know each other, and newcomers were instantly noticed. Emily adjusted her backpack on her shoulder, her fingers nervously fiddling with the frayed zipper. Her long, wavy chestnut hair cascaded down her back, almost reaching her waist, a feature she cherished deeply. Her mother often called it her crown, something that made her unique. But today, it felt like a target, a beacon of difference. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" her mother asked with a soft smile, trying to mask her own worries. "As ready as I'll ever be," Emily replied, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. They drove in silence to Maplewood Middle School. The building stood at the corner of Oak Street, with its red brick facade, large windows, and an old bell tower that seemed more decorative than functional. Students swarmed the entrance, laughing, chatting, and forming groups that Emily instantly recognized as well-established cliques. As they walked toward the front office, Emily felt dozens of eyes follow her. Whispers floated through the air, barely audible but heavy with curiosity. "Who's that? Must be new. Look at her hair. Wow." The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Caldwell, greeted them warmly and handed Emily her schedule along with a map of the school. "Welcome to Maplewood, Emily. You're going to do just fine here," she said with a wink, though her words felt more hopeful than certain. Her first class was English, room 214, on the second floor. As Emily climbed the stairs, her heart thudded painfully against her chest. She passed bulletin boards filled with announcements for the spring dance, science fair winners, and pictures of sports teams grinning proudly in their uniforms. When she pushed open the classroom door, the chatter momentarily hushed. 20 pairs of eyes snapped toward her. Some curious, some indifferent, and a few with a sharpness that immediately unsettled her. "Class, this is Emily Johnson," announced Mrs. Parker, the English teacher, an older woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. "She just moved here from Cleveland. Let's all make her feel welcome." There were a few polite nods, a couple of murmured greetings, but the energy in the room didn't shift much. Mrs. Parker pointed to an empty desk near the middle row. As Emily made her way there, she felt the weight of every glance following her steps. It was then she noticed them, 3 girls seated together at the back, whispering behind cupped hands while smirking. The one in the center had perfectly straight blonde hair, heavy mascara, and an expression that screamed entitlement. That was Madison. Flanking her were Chloe, with fiery red hair tied in a high ponytail, and Ashley, a brunette who tapped her nails rhythmically against her desk. They didn't bother hiding their scrutiny. Chloe tilted her head, examining Emily as if she were a specimen under a microscope. Ashley giggled, covering her mouth, but her eyes stayed locked on Emily's hair. "Nice dress." Madison muttered just loud enough for her friends to hear but low enough that the teacher wouldn't catch it. "Did Goodwill have a sale?" Emily's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze straight ahead. She had promised herself that today she wouldn't cry. Not today. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Mrs. Parker discussed the upcoming poetry project, pairing students randomly. Emily was relieved that her partner was a quiet boy named Ethan, who seemed more interested in his notebook than in social drama. But even as she tried to focus, Emily could feel the occasional glance from the trio at the back. The whispering, the stifled laughs, it was clear she had drawn their attention. And not in a way she wanted. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Emily gathered her books quickly. As she stepped into the hallway, the sea of students swallowed her. Some brushed past without notice. Others glanced her way. But more often than not, the same pattern repeated, a look, a whisper, a smirk. By lunchtime, the dread in her stomach had grown into something physical. She wandered into the cafeteria, scanning for a place to sit. Most tables were filled with groups already formed. Athletes, drama kids, the science club, and those who simply existed in their own small worlds. She finally found an empty spot near the window and sat alone, unwrapping her sandwich. Slowly. Her eyes stayed down, pretending to be engrossed in her food, though her ears caught everything around her. That new girl looks so weird. Her hair is like, way too much. Bet she thinks she's special. The voices weren't always directed at her openly, but the intent was clear. Emily gripped her sandwich tighter, trying to block it out. She wondered if moving had been a mistake. If maybe, just maybe, her mom was wrong, that starting over wasn't as easy as packing boxes and driving to a new zip code. But beneath the uncertainty and the bubbling anxiety, a small part of Emily whispered a stubborn truth: she had been through worse. And she would survive this too. What she didn't know was that the days ahead would test her in ways she never imagined. And that this small town, with its smiling faces and neatly trimmed lawns, was about to show an uglier side that would change her life forever. The next morning, Emily stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection with a mix of dread and determination. Her mother had offered to drive her to school again, but Emily declined. She knew she had to start figuring things out on her own. Her fingers trembled slightly as she braided a portion of her long hair, hoping it might make her stand out less. But deep down, she knew it was futile. Her hair had always drawn attention, whether she wanted it or not. The walk to school was quiet, the soft crunch of her sneakers against the gravel sidewalk the only sound accompanying her. Maplewood was peaceful on the surface, neatly mowed lawns, tidy mailboxes, and picket fences lining the streets. But behind the peaceful exterior, Emily could already sense the unspoken social rules that governed the school halls. Rules that had no place for someone like her, someone new, someone different. As soon as she stepped through the front doors of Maplewood Middle School, the energy shifted. Conversations dulled momentarily before picking back up in hushed tones. People glanced her way, not out of curiosity anymore, but with something sharper. Something judgmental. Her first class was science, room 112, on the ground floor. She took a deep breath before walking in, pretending she was invisible, pretending none of the whispers mattered. But the moment her foot crossed the threshold, the subtle tension in the room was undeniable. Madison was already there, sitting casually on top of a desk at the back, flanked by Chloe and Ashley. Madison's posture was relaxed, her arms crossed loosely, but her eyes tracked Emily with a predatory glint. Chloe leaned in to whisper something, and the three burst into laughter, their eyes never leaving Emily. As Emily made her way to her seat, which happened to be just one row ahead of the trio, she caught fragments of their conversation. "Look at that hair." Chloe snickered. "Bet she uses it to hide the fact that she has no friends." Ashley giggled, tapping Madison on the arm. "90s called, they want their look back. It's like a mop. Someone should tell her that." Madison didn't say anything at first. She just watched, her lips curling into a smirk, before delivering her comment with a venomous sweetness. "Honestly, I'm just wondering how long she thinks she can survive here looking like that." Emily's pulse quickened. Her ears burned, but she clenched her jaw and pretended not to hear. She unpacked her notebook, carefully arranging her pens as if that simple act could shield her from the barbs being thrown her way. Mr. Reynolds, the science teacher, entered a moment later, completely oblivious to the silent war waging in his classroom. His cheerful greeting and discussion about the upcoming volcano project filled the air, but Emily barely processed any of it. She was hyper-aware of the girls behind her, the stifled laughs, the whispers, the occasional sharp intake of breath that clearly preceded another mean remark. The class dragged on painfully. Every time Mr. Reynolds turned his back to write on the board, Madison would tap her pencil rhythmically against Emily's chair, sending vibrations straight through her. Chloe would cough Emily's name followed by a snide "loser" under her breath, and Ashley would let out dramatic sighs every time Emily answered a question, no matter how correctly. When the bell finally rang, Emily tried to leave quickly, but Madison was faster. As Emily gathered her books, Madison brushed past her, deliberately bumping her shoulder with more force than necessary. "Oops. Watch where you're going, new girl," Madison said with a saccharine smile before sauntering out with Chloe and Ashley trailing behind, both laughing like it was the funniest thing they had ever witnessed. Emily exhaled sharply, realizing only then that she had been holding her breath. Her hands shook as she stuffed her notebook into her bag. She could feel the eyes of other students on her, not with sympathy, but with that uncomfortable mixture of curiosity and relief that it wasn't them in her place. Lunchtime was no better. As she entered the cafeteria, the same oppressive energy greeted her. She scanned the tables quickly, searching for any friendly face, but the truth was clear, she was utterly alone. As she passed by Madison's table, the laughter started again. This time it wasn't even subtle. Madison leaned over to Chloe and Ashley, speaking just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I mean, it's sad, right? Coming here thinking she could just sit wherever she wants like she belongs," Madison said, flicking her hair over her shoulder. "Maybe she thought this was charity day," Chloe added with a grin. "Pity points for the new girl," Ashley giggled. "Or maybe she's just too clueless to realize nobody wants her here." Emily's stomach twisted painfully. She kept her head down and found the same spot by the window where she had eaten the day before. She pulled out her sandwich, but her appetite had vanished. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it anyway, pretending like none of it bothered her. But it did. Every word, every snicker, every glance felt like a tiny cut. And the worst part was knowing that no one was going to step in. Not the teachers, not the other students. Everyone either looked away or pretended it wasn't happening. As she sat there, staring out the window, Emily wondered if she had somehow made a mistake in thinking she could start fresh. Back in Cleveland, she had friends. She had people who knew her, who laughed with her, not at her. Here, it felt like she was nothing more than a target. The rest of the day was much the same. In math class, Madison passed a note that floated briefly across Emily's desk before landing in Chloe's hands. Emily caught sight of a crude drawing, a stick figure with long, tangled hair, labeled, "The Witch." The sound of muffled laughter filled the air as Chloe scribbled something underneath and passed it back. In history, Ashley accidentally knocked Emily's pencil case off her desk, scattering pens and erasers across the floor. When Emily bent to pick them up, she heard Madison's mocking voice. "Careful. Wouldn't want to mess up that, whatever that is on your head." By the end of the day, Emily felt like she had been through a storm. Her shoulders ached from the tension of keeping her head down, her jaw was sore from clenching it too tightly, and her eyes stung with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. As she stepped outside, the late afternoon sun felt harsh rather than comforting. She walked home in silence, her thoughts a jumbled mess of humiliation, anger, and sadness. When she reached her house, her mother greeted her with a warm smile that faded the moment she saw Emily's face. But Emily shook her head before her mother could ask. She didn't want to talk about it. Not yet. She headed straight to her room, closing the door softly behind her. Sitting on her bed, she ran her fingers through her hair, gripping it tightly for a moment as if trying to remind herself that this was still hers. That no matter what they said, this was her identity, her choice. But as much as she tried to convince herself of that, a sinking feeling crept in, a whisper of dread that this was only the beginning. The morning sun filtered weakly through the half-closed blinds as Emily forced herself out of bed. Her chest felt heavy, as though a weight had settled there overnight, pressing against her ribs, making every breath feel just a little bit harder than it should. Her mother knocked softly on the door, asking if she wanted a ride, but Emily declined again. A ride would only make her arrival more noticeable, and she had learned quickly that being noticed in Maplewood Middle School was not a good thing. The walk to school felt longer today. The breeze tugged at her hair, and every step closer to the building felt like willingly approaching the mouth of a lion. She tried to remind herself that not every person was cruel. That somewhere in those crowded hallways, maybe, someone could be a friend. But that small sliver of hope grew thinner with each step. As she approached her locker, the familiar hush fell over the hallway. Conversations dipped in volume, followed by glances thrown in her direction. Her hands trembled slightly as she twisted the lock open, pretending not to notice Madison leaning casually against a row of lockers. Nearby, flanked as always by Chloe and Ashley. "Looks like Raggedy Ann showed up again." Madison's voice rang out, dripping with mock sweetness. Chloe snorted, doubling over as if it was the funniest thing she had ever heard. While Ashley gave a slow, sarcastic clap. Emily kept her eyes focused on her books, willing her hands to stay steady as she swapped out her math binder for her English notebook. But it was impossible not to hear the snickers behind her, the sharp intake of breath before the next insult landed. "Oh wait." Ashley chimed in. "Raggedy Ann was cute. My mistake." Chloe's voice followed, smug and cruel. Kind of tragic fashion statement. "Seriously though, what's with the hair? Is it, like, some?" Emily's throat tightened. She bit the inside of her cheek so hard it almost bled, determined not to cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not here. Not now. The first 2 periods passed under the same cloud of tension. In English, every time Emily tried to answer a question, Madison would mimic her softly from the back, repeating her words in a mocking tone just loud enough for Chloe and Ashley to burst into muffled laughter. The teacher, oblivious or simply choosing not to notice, continued with the lesson as if nothing was wrong. By the time the lunch bell rang, Emily's stomach was twisted in knots. She debated skipping lunch entirely, hiding in the bathroom until the bell rang for the next class, but her hunger won out. As she entered the cafeteria, the now familiar wave of whispers and glances followed her. She headed toward her usual table by the window, hoping to blend into the background. But today, the bullies had other plans. As Emily walked past their table, Madison stuck her leg out just enough to catch Emily's foot. Time seemed to slow for a split second before gravity did its cruel work. Emily stumbled forward. Her tray slipping from her hands, crashing to the floor with a loud clatter. The sandwich, apple, and milk carton scattered in every direction. The cafeteria fell silent for a brief, painful moment. Then the laughter exploded. "Oops," Madison said, feigning innocence. "Did someone forget how to walk?" Chloe chimed in, clutching her stomach. "Or maybe she was trying to fly." "Almost worked." Ashley wiped fake tears from her eyes, gasping between laughs. "Oh my God, this is better than TikTok." Emily pushed herself up quickly, face burning so hot it felt like it might catch fire. She crouched down, gathering the scattered contents of her lunch with trembling hands, trying to ignore the sea of eyes watching her, judging her. "Careful," Madison added, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your own hair next time. Wouldn't want you to trip over." That comment stung more than the fall itself. Her hair, her one constant, her symbol of comfort. An identity, now weaponized against her again. No teacher intervened. No student stepped in. Even the lunch monitors merely sighed and scribbled notes on their clipboards, pretending to be busy while the scene unfolded. Emily's hands shook as she shoved the ruined lunch back onto the tray, tears threatening to spill but held back by sheer force of will. As she stood to throw the tray away, a crumpled napkin landed on her shoulder. She glanced down and saw it was scribbled with the words, "Freak Show." Her vision blurred, not just from the sting of unshed tears, but from the suffocating pressure of humiliation. She escaped the cafeteria as quickly as she could, bolting into the nearest girl's bathroom. Locking herself in a stall, she leaned against the door, hands pressed to her chest, feeling her heartbeat pounding like a drum. Her breathing came in ragged gasps as her shoulders trembled. For a long minute, she let herself cry in silence. No sobs, no sound, just the heavy, suffocating release of holding everything in for far too long. When the bell rang for the next class, she washed her face, adjusted her hair, and forced herself back into the hallways as if nothing had happened. But her reflection in the mirror betrayed her. Her red-rimmed eyes and pale face told the truth even if her voice would not. The rest of the day followed the same cruel rhythm. In art class, Chloe accidentally spilled water across Emily's desk, soaking her sketchbook. When Emily scrambled to save it, Madison muttered just loud enough. "Probably for the best. Whatever you were drawing was garbage. Anyway." In gym, while lining up for relay races, Ashley sneered. "Bet you trip over your hair before the first cone." Even when they weren't directly speaking to her, the whispers lingered. Emily could hear them. Behind her back, seeping through every classroom, every hallway. Words like weird, creepy, loser bounced around like invisible darts. Each one landed squarely in the soft parts of her. Places she didn't even know were vulnerable until they hurt. The worst part was the isolation. No one else seemed willing to get involved. Students who might have smiled at her on the first day now averted their eyes. Some looked uncomfortable. But most simply pretended not to notice. The unwritten rule was clear: stay invisible, stay out of the crosshairs, or you become the next target. By the final bell, Emily walked home with heavy steps, gripping her backpack straps so tightly. Her knuckles turned white. Her head hung lower than the day before. Her carefully braided hair had come undone during gym, strands falling messily around her face like a curtain. Part of her wanted to cut it all off right then and there, just to stop giving them something to latch onto. But another part, a quieter, fiercer part, knew that giving in would be letting them win. Still, doubt gnawed at her. How much longer could she endure this before something inside her finally broke? As she reached her front door, her mother opened it before she could knock, sensing instantly that something was wrong. But once again, Emily brushed past her, offering only a strained "fine," before locking herself in her bedroom. I'm sitting on her bed, she stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. Her hair fell like a shield around her face, but for the first time, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like a target. And somewhere deep inside, a terrifying question surfaced: how far would Madison, Chloe, and Ashley go to make sure she never forgot she didn't belong? The morning air felt heavier than usual as Emily trudged toward school, her feet moving automatically while her mind was anything but steady. Her hands gripped the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. She had spent most of the previous evening staring into the mirror, questioning whether there was anything she could do to disappear more. Maybe a different hairstyle, maybe different clothes, maybe walking faster, maybe slower. But every possible adjustment seemed useless in the face of the relentless cruelty she had faced over the past few days. When she stepped into Maplewood Middle School that morning, the tension was palpable. The second she walked through the doors, the usual routine of stares, whispers, and suppressed laughter greeted her like a broken record that refused to stop playing. But something felt different today, something sharper in the air, something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. First period went by quietly, almost eerily so. Madison, Chloe, and Ashley kept their distance. But their eyes followed Emily with a strange intensity that made her skin crawl. There were no whispered comments, no cruel giggles this time, just silence punctuated by glances exchanged between the trio. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort but warned of a storm brewing. By the time third period came, art class, Emily felt her stomach nodding in anticipation of something, though she couldn't name what. Still, the class proceeded without incident. Her hands shook slightly as she tried to focus on her drawing, pretending that the occasional glance from Madison didn't unnerve her. But Madison's eyes weren't filled with the usual mockery today. Instead, they gleamed with something colder. Something calculated. Then came fourth period, history. The tension ramped up another notch. Chloe and Ashley whispered back and forth, occasionally scribbling something in their notebooks and suppressing laughter, but when the teacher looked their way, they fell instantly silent. Madison sat back in her chair, legs crossed, chewing the end of her pen, her gaze bouncing between Emily and her two friends with a predatory satisfaction. But it was fifth period when everything finally snapped. Fifth period was science, a group activity day. Mr. Reynolds, energetic and always enthusiastic about hands-on learning, had organized a lab project where students were paired into small groups of 4. Emily's heart sank when she read the group assignments written on the board. Group 4, Madison, Chloe, Ashley, and Emily. Her palms instantly grew clammy. Her breathing became shallow. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand and shuffle over to the lab table assigned to their group. Her mind raced with 1,000 worst-case scenarios, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. Madison greeted her with a smile so fake it was practically dripping with venom. Said, feigning delight, "This is going to be so much fun. Oh look." Chloe giggled, her hands already fiddling with her notebook, while Ashley muttered something under her breath that Emily didn't catch but could tell wasn't kind. Mr. Reynolds explained the assignment, a simple experiment mixing baking soda and vinegar to demonstrate chemical reactions. He then moved from table to table, assisting other groups, oblivious to the charged atmosphere around Group 4. As they began measuring ingredients, Madison leaned in close to Emily, her voice low but laced with malice. "Hold still," she said, almost too sweetly. "You've got something, right, here." Before Emily could react, Madison's hand darted into the supply bin on their table, not for a beaker or a dropper, but for the large pair of classroom scissors sitting innocently among the tools. It happened so fast. Madison's fingers twisted around the handle, and in one swift, horrifying motion, she grabbed a thick lock of Emily's hair, yanked it downward, and sliced. The metallic snip echoed through the classroom like a gunshot. Emily froze. Her breath caught in her throat. For a split second, the world tilted. A thick, heavy strand of her long, chestnut hair fell onto the table, coiling like a lifeless rope. There was a pause, a heartbeat of stunned silence, as if the entire universe forgot how to breathe. Then Chloe gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with mock shock, before bursting into uncontrollable laughter. Ashley followed suit, banging her fist on the table as tears streamed down her face from laughing so hard. "Oh my God!" Chloe wheezed, barely able to speak. "You actually did it. Look at it!" Ashley shrieked. "It's like a dead animal." Madison twirled the severed lock between her fingers, holding it up as if it were some grotesque trophy. "You're welcome," she said with a cruel smile. "Honestly, I did you a favor." The sound of chairs scraping back and muffled gasps spread through the room. Some students stared in wide-eyed horror, mouths agape. Others laughed nervously, unsure whether to join in or recoil. A few simply looked away, burying their heads in their notebooks, pretending not to see. Emily sat motionless, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Her hands hovered uselessly over her lap, fingers trembling. A hot wave of shame surged up her neck, followed by an overwhelming sting of humiliation, hurt, and disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes, but she clenched her jaw tight, forcing them not to fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Mr. Reynolds remained oblivious, bent over another group's project on the opposite side of the room, laughing at a student's joke, completely unaware that a line had just been crossed so violently in his own classroom. Madison dropped the severed hair onto Emily's open science notebook, where it lay like a cruel symbol of power and dominance. "You should really thank me," Madison sneered, brushing invisible dust off her shirt as though the act had dirted her. "Now you might actually look normal." Chloe snickered. "Or at least less like a cave woman." Ashley grinned, adding, "Yeah, too bad we didn't finish the job." Emily pushed back from the table so suddenly her chair screeched across the floor, drawing the attention of a few nearby students but not the teacher. Her hands flew to her head instinctively, fingers scrambling through the place where the lock had been. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths, and the room swam out of focus. The sound of laughter, the blurred outlines of students watching but saying nothing, the thundering roar of her own heartbeat in her ears, all of it combined into a dizzying, suffocating storm. Without another word, Emily turned and bolted from the classroom. The door banged against the frame as she fled down the hallway, vision clouded with tears she could no longer hold back. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted past lockers and classrooms, ignoring the startled faces of teachers and students who watched her go. All she knew was that she had to get away. Away from the cruelty. Away from the shame. Away from the piece of herself now lying on that lab table, severed, lifeless, and treated like nothing. More than trash. Emily's shoes echoed loudly down the empty hallway as she sprinted away from the science room, her vision blurred by the flood of tears she could no longer suppress. Her chest burned. Each breath jagged, sharp, as if the simple act of breathing had suddenly become a monumental task. Her hand clutched instinctively at the spot where her hair had been violently cut, fingers trembling as they brushed over the uneven strands. The texture of the ragged edge was foreign, wrong, a cruel reminder that something precious had been ripped away from her. She didn't know where she was going. Her legs moved on autopilot, carrying her through the maze of corridors until she pushed through the heavy door of the nearest girl's bathroom. The cold tiles met her palms as she collapsed against the far wall, curling herself into the smallest shape possible, knees drawn to her chest, forehead resting against them. The sobs came then. Heavy, suffocating, uncontrollable. Her mind replayed the moment in a vicious loop, the snip of the scissors, the glint of satisfaction in Madison's eyes, the laughter from Chloe and Ashley, the stunned faces of classmates who did nothing. Every single detail, every cruel word, every malicious giggle seared itself deeper into her memory, like scars that would never fully fade. She didn't know how long she sat there, folded against the cold tile, her body trembling. The muffled sounds of the hallway outside came and went, footsteps, distant voices, the occasional slam of a locker, but none of it penetrated the suffocating bubble of humiliation surrounding her. When the tears finally subsided enough for her to lift her head, Emily dragged herself toward the mirror. The sight that greeted her was like a punch to the gut. Her hair, once long, flowing, and beautiful, was now visibly uneven. A thick section on the left side was hacked off, sitting far shorter than the rest, sticking out awkwardly, jagged, raw. It looked exactly like what it was, a wound. Her fingers hovered over the damage, as if hoping they could somehow will it back into place. But no amount of wishing would change what had been done. Her lip quivered as a fresh wave of tears threatened, but she blinked it back, forcing herself to breathe. She splashed cold water on her face, watching the droplets slide down her cheeks, tracing paths through the redness of her skin. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks blotchy, but she couldn't hide here forever. As she stared into the mirror, one agonizing truth became more suffocating than everything else. No one had stopped it. No one had spoken up. Not a single student had intervened. Even the ones who had gasped, who had looked horrified, had chosen silence over action. The realization stung almost worse than Madison's cruelty. The silence of witnesses, the choice to do nothing, felt like a betrayal she hadn't expected. She had been naive enough to believe that maybe someone, anyone, would care enough to say, "Stop." But they hadn't. They had watched. Some had even laughed. When she finally left the bathroom, the bell signaling the end of class was ringing. She slipped into the hallway, head down, trying to become invisible again. But it was too late for invisibility. Her face was still flushed, her eyes still puffy, and the damage to her hair unmistakable. She walked quickly, avoiding eye contact, but the whispers caught up with her anyway. "Did you see what Madison did?" "Yeah, she actually cut it. I thought she was just joking, but she really did it. Honestly, she had it coming. Walking around with that hair like she's better than everyone. Poor thing. Look at her. Or maybe she finally fits in now." The words blended together into a cruel, buzzing static. Emily's hands clenched into fists inside her sleeves, nails biting into her palms as she fought back another surge of tears. She made it through the next class by sheer force of will. The teacher glanced at her once, furrowing his brow as if noticing her disheveled appearance, but said nothing. Emily sat stiffly at her desk, refusing to look at anyone, pretending to take notes while her mind spiraled between humiliation and numbness. Madison, Chloe, and Ashley walked into the classroom 10 minutes late, whispering and laughing like they owned the world. Madison's eyes flicked toward Emily with the same smug satisfaction of a predator who knew there would be no consequences. No one confronted them. No one even asked what had happened. The silence was suffocating, deafening. It wasn't just the silence of the teachers but the silence of everyone, the students who had witnessed it, the ones who had heard the laughter, seen the scissors, watched the lock of hair fall to the desk. Every single one had decided that silence was easier. When the final bell rang, releasing the students for the day, Emily gathered her things slowly, waiting until most of the class had filed out. She stepped into the hallway, walking like a ghost, drifting toward her locker, her hands mechanically turning the dial even though she barely registered what she was doing. As she opened the locker, a folded piece of paper slipped out and landed at her feet. Her stomach clenched instantly. Slowly, with shaking hands, she bent down and picked it up, unfolding it cautiously. Inside, written in messy block letters, were the words, "Should have cut it all off. You'd look better." Bald. Her breath hitched, a sharp gasp that escaped before she could stop it. Her hands crumpled the paper, her fingers squeezing it into a tight, shaking ball before she stuffed it deep into her pocket. Her throat burned. Her vision blurred. Around her, students bustled through the hallways as if nothing had happened. Laughing. Talking. Living their lives. While she stood there drowning in a storm of humiliation they had all silently allowed. Her walk home felt endless. Every step was heavy, her backpack dragging her down like an anchor. The houses she passed blurred into one another, her vision clouded by unshed tears and exhaustion. She barely registered the sounds of cars passing, the chirping of birds, or the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. The world moved on, indifferent to the pain weighing her down. When she reached her front door, her mother was waiting, standing on the porch as if she had sensed something was wrong the moment Emily left for school. Her mother's smile faltered instantly the second her eyes landed on Emily's face, and then on her hair. "Emily, what happened?" Her voice was soft but filled with panic, her eyes scanning her daughter for answers. Emily couldn't hold it in any longer. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, a broken sob escaped her lips, followed by another, and another, until her entire body trembled with the force of it. Her mother rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Emily, pulling her close. "It's okay," she whispered over and over, stroking Emily's back as the sobs racked her small frame. "It's okay, baby. I've got you. You're safe now. You're safe." But even as the words wrapped around her like a blanket, Emily knew the truth. She wasn't safe. Not at school. Not in those hallways where silence was louder than screams, where cruelty wore the mask of laughter, and where the people who should have helped simply turned away. And in that moment, held tight in her mother's arms, Emily realized something else, something more painful than anything Madison, Chloe, or Ashley could have ever said. The silence hurt more than the scissors ever could. Emily stayed curled against her mother for what felt like hours, her sobs eventually dissolving into ragged breaths, her body exhausted from the emotional storm. Her mother stroked her hair, or what was left of it, gently, whispering soft reassurances that neither of them truly believed at that moment. The damage was done. Her mother's warm arms couldn't undo the brutal humiliation that had unfolded in that classroom. Her mother eventually pulled back, cupping Emily's face in her hands, her expression shifting from heartbreak to something sharper, fierce, protective anger. "We are not letting this go," she said firmly. "We are going to fix this. You hear me?" Emily nodded, but her response was hollow. No amount of promises could erase the memory of the laughter, the scissors, the silence of everyone around her. That night was restless. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her fingers tangled in the uneven strands of her hair. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Madison's smirk, heard the snap of the scissors, felt the crushing wave of humiliation all over again. Sleep came in fits, only to be shattered by the same recurring nightmare, being surrounded, helpless, while her hair was ripped away again and again. Morning came faster than she wanted. The sun rose with a cruelty that matched the town's indifference. Her mother offered to call her in sick, but Emily shook her head. As much as her body screamed to stay home, to hide from the world, she knew that not going back would be like letting them win. With trembling fingers, she tried to salvage her hair as best as she could. Her mother stood behind her with scissors, hands shaking, trimming the worst of the damage into something halfway presentable. No fancy styles. No braids. No flowing waves. Just straight cuts meant to minimize the jagged edges Madison's assault had left behind. But nothing could truly mask the fact that something had been taken from her. The walk to school felt like walking toward her own execution. Every step grew heavier, her heart pounding in her ears as she approached the front doors. She wondered how many whispers would greet her today, how many stares would pierce her as soon as she entered. As soon as she stepped inside, the weight of the hallway pressed down on her again. The chatter dimmed. Heads turned. Whispers ignited like sparks on dry leaves. Some students nudged each other, their gazes darting to her and then away as if looking directly at her might somehow draw her misfortune upon themselves. She kept her head down, moving quickly toward her locker, pretending she didn't notice. But the silence that surrounded her wasn't empty, it was filled with judgment, pity, and something even worse, satisfaction from those who thrived on watching others crumble. She was spinning her lock when a voice behind her broke through the fog. "Hey, wait." Emily stiffened, expecting another cruel remark, another insult disguised as casual conversation. But the voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't mocking. It was soft, hesitant, almost nervous. She turned, cautiously, and there stood Sarah, a quiet girl from her English class. Sarah had always been on the fringes, never really part of any group. She was the kind of student others ignored or occasionally picked on but never fully targeted because she wasn't interesting enough for the bullies to bother with most days. Sarah shifted on her feet, clutching a sketchbook against her chest, her pale blue eyes flickering between Emily's face and the floor. I saw what happened yesterday," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In science. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Emily blinked, caught off guard. Of all the reactions she had braced herself for, this wasn't one of them. No one, not a single person, had approached her with anything resembling kindness since she arrived. Her throat tightened, but this time not from pain. From surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway buzzed around them, but it felt strangely distant, like background noise in a different world. Emily studied Sarah's face, the way her eyes darted nervously, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself Smaller. Someone who knew all too well what it felt like to be invisible until it was time to be mocked. "Thank you," Emily whispered. Her voice cracked slightly, but she meant it. More than Sarah could possibly know. Sarah gave a small, shy smile. If you want, we can go to the bathroom. I have some pins, and a brush. We could try to fix it a little. Your hair, I mean." She glanced away, cheeks flushing with the effort of speaking. "If you want." For the first time since the scissors had sliced through her world, Emily felt something thaw. Something small, fragile, but undeniably real. The idea that someone, anyone, cared enough to offer help sent a warmth through her chest that caught her completely off guard. "Yeah," Emily said softly, nodding. "Yeah, okay." They walked together down the hallway, side by side, neither of them speaking much. But it wasn't the heavy silence Emily had come to dread. This silence was comfortable, companionable. The kind that didn't need to be filled with words to mean something. In the bathroom, Sarah set her sketchbook down on the counter and rummaged through her backpack, pulling out a small pouch filled with hairpins, clips, and a worn brush. "It's not much," she muttered. "But maybe we can do something." As Sarah carefully sectioned off the most uneven parts of Emily's hair, pinning them back into a half-up style, her hands were gentle, precise. There was no laughter, no mocking, no judgment. Just quiet concentration. The brush glided through the strands, smoothing what could be smoothed, hiding what couldn't be fixed. "You have really pretty hair," Sarah murmured as she worked. "Even before, you know. I always thought so." "Even." Emily's throat tightened again, but this time with a different kind of ache. Managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." When Sarah stepped back to let Emily look in the mirror, Emily hardly recognized herself. The damage was still there, the cut ends, the uneven layers, but it was neater, tidier. It looked less like something torn away and more like something survived. Sarah smiled, a little shy but proud. "There. It's not perfect but, it's better. It's a lot better." Emily whispered, her chest tightening with something that felt suspiciously like hope. "Thank you." "Really?" Sarah shrugged, ducking her head. "Want? I mean, you can sit with me. You don't have to sit alone at lunch. If you..." The words hit harder than any insult Madison had ever thrown. Emily blinked quickly, swallowing past the lump rising in her throat. "I'd like that," she said, meaning every word. As they left the bathroom together, for the first time since arriving at Maplewood, Emily realized something important. Maybe the world wasn't entirely made of cruelty. Maybe there were people like Sarah. People who noticed. People who cared. And maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to face this nightmare alone. The hours that followed felt different. Not because the whispers had stopped, they hadn't. Not because the stairs had disappeared, they were still there, sharp as ever. But because walking through the hallways with Sarah by her side created a subtle but undeniable shift in Emily's world. For the first time since she had set foot in Maplewood Middle School, she didn't feel entirely alone. At lunch, they sat together at the far corner of the cafeteria, a spot Sarah explained had always been hers, not by choice but by necessity. It was the place no one cared enough to claim. Tucked away from the noise, the gossip, the scrutiny. Emily slid her tray onto the table, her fingers still trembling slightly but far steadier than the day before. As she unwrapped her sandwich, she caught sight of Madison's table on the other side of the room. Madison sat there like royalty, her chair slightly pushed back, one leg crossed over the other, flanked by Chloe and Ashley. Their laughter was louder than it needed to be, designed specifically to draw attention. Madison occasionally glanced toward Emily's corner, her mouth curling into that familiar smirk, the one that said, "I still own this school, and you're still nothing." But something inside Emily had shifted. The fear was still there, tangled deep in her chest. But beneath it, something new was taking root. A simmering defiance. A stubborn refusal to let them dictate how small she was allowed to feel. They think they can just do whatever they want. Emily muttered, not realizing she had spoken aloud until Sarah looked up from her notebook, startled. Sarah nodded slowly. "They always have," she said quietly. "Nobody ever stops them." Emily's fingers tightened around her sandwich. Her voice sharper now, edged with frustration. "What happened? Why doesn't anyone say anything?" she asked. "The teachers, the other students, they all saw." "Because they're scared," Sarah answered after a pause, her eyes dropping back to her notebook. Madison's family, her mom's on the school board. Her dad some big-shot lawyer. People think, if they speak up, it'll just make their lives worse. Emily stared at her, the weight of that answer settling heavily over her. They just let it happen. So they let it happen. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. The rest of the day passed in a blur of numb focus. Emily drifted through her classes, aware of the stairs but no longer letting them pierce quite as deep. She sat beside Sarah whenever she could, finding solace in the quiet companionship. Madison and her friends continued their usual games, the whispered comments, the exchanged looks, but something was different now. Their words still hurt, but they no longer held the same crushing power. Still, the ache lingered, not from the insults, but from the silence that followed them. The silence of teachers pretending not to notice. The silence of students too afraid to act. The silence of a system that allowed cruelty to thrive as long as it was wrapped in a thin veil of kids being kids. That night, back at home, Emily sat at the kitchen table while her mother prepared dinner. Her fingers traced circles on the wood grain, her mind churning. Her mother noticed the tension and set the knife down, turning to face her. "Talk to me," she said gently. Emily hesitated, then blurted it all out, everything that had happened. Every word, every cruel act, every time someone had turned away instead of helping. She recounted how Madison had grabbed her hair, how the scissors had sliced through it, how the laughter had echoed louder than anything else in the room. Her mother's face shifted from concern to disbelief to barely contained fury. This is unacceptable," she said, pacing the kitchen. "This isn't bullying. This is assault. They assaulted you." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "I know," she whispered. "Teachers, they pretend they don't see it. But nobody's doing anything." Her mother stopped pacing, planted both hands on the table, and looked directly into Emily's eyes. "Then we're going to make them see." The words landed like a spark in dry brush. Emily sat up straighter, her heartbeat quickening. "What do you mean?" "We are going to the school tomorrow," her mother said firmly. "We're talking to the principal, the superintendent if we have to. This isn't something they get to sweep under the rug." A surge of fear mingled with the sudden flare of hope. What if it makes things worse? Emily's voice wavered. The thought of facing Madison's wrath, multiplied by the humiliation of her family stepping in, sent a chill down her spine. Her mother's gaze softened, but her tone stayed firm. Emily, you don't fight bullies by staying quiet. You fight them by showing them you're not afraid of them anymore. Emily swallowed hard. The fear was real, but so was the simmering fire now growing inside her. She had spent every day since arriving trying to survive by shrinking herself, by staying small, by hoping to disappear. But shrinking hadn't saved her. Hiding hadn't protected her. Silence had only handed power to the ones who thrived on hurting others. That night, after dinner, Emily sat at her desk and stared at her reflection in the dark window. Her fingers brushed the rough edges of her hair, tracing the place where the scissors had bitten deepest. Slowly, she pulled open her notebook and started writing. Not an essay. Not homework. Not something for a grade. But a statement. Her story. Every word poured out in raw, jagged honesty. The first day. The whispers. The mocking. The lunch tray. The scissors. The laughter. The silence. She wrote until her hand cramped, until her eyes burned, until there was nothing left to say that hadn't been bled onto the page. When she finished, she stared at the words, her truth, laid bare. And for the first time, she felt something close to relief. Because saying it out loud, even just to herself, took away some of its power. The next morning arrived with the same knot of anxiety in her stomach. But this time, there was something else mixed in, a thread of resolve that hadn't been there before. Her mother drove her to school, not bothering to ask if she wanted a ride this time. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision. They walked together into the front office, heads held high. The secretary blinked in surprise but quickly directed them to the principal's office. Mrs. Henderson, the principal, greeted them with the overly rehearsed smile of someone who dealt with parents regularly and expected the usual complaints about grades or minor disagreements. But the smile faltered the moment Emily's mother placed the written statement on the desk and said, in a voice colder than ice, "We need to talk." Mrs. Henderson glanced at the paper, then at Emily, then back at her mother. "Whatever this is, it's a misunderstanding. I'm sure." "No." Emily's mother interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. "This is a problem. A serious one. This is not a misunderstanding." Emily sat beside her mother, hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart pounding, but she didn't look away. She met Mrs. Henderson's eyes, and for the first time, refused to shrink. As her mother outlined every detail, every act of cruelty, every time a teacher had ignored it, every time silence had enabled it, Mrs. Henderson's face paled. Her fingers fumbled with a pen, her composure slipping further with each passing second. When Emily spoke, her voice quiet but steady, the words felt like releasing a breath she had been holding for weeks. "They cut my hair," she said, in front of the whole class. "And nobody did anything." The silence that followed was different this time. Not the suffocating silence of complicity, but the heavy, uncomfortable silence of someone realizing they could no longer pretend not to see. The air inside the principal's office felt stifling, thick with tension so sharp it could almost be touched. Mrs. Henderson, a woman known for her composed demeanor, sat behind her polished oak desk, hands clasped tightly together as she listened. Or rather, pretended to. Her eyes flicked occasionally toward her computer screen, her pen tapped rhythmically against a notepad, but she avoided Emily's gaze as if looking her in the eyes would make the truth undeniable. Emily's mother sat forward, her voice unwavering. Each word she spoke was deliberate, heavy, filled with a quiet fury that left no room for dismissal. She outlined everything with meticulous detail, From the whispered insults and the cafeteria humiliation to the moment when scissors sliced through her daughter's hair in front of a classroom full of witnesses. And what exactly? Her mother pressed, her eyes narrowing. Something like this never happens again. Is your school doing to ensure that? Mrs. Henderson adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and forced a smile so brittle it might have shattered if touched. Mrs. Johnson, I assure you that Maplewood Middle School takes bullying very seriously. Children, well, sometimes children have disagreements. These things, they can get out of hand, but it's important to remember that middle schoolers are still learning how to navigate social situations. Emily blinked, barely believing what she was hearing. Her fingernails dug into her palms under the desk as her throat tightened. Disagreements, her mother repeated, voice razor-sharp. Daughter, a disagreement? You call what happened to my... Mrs. Henderson raised her hands in a pacifying gesture. Of course, it's unacceptable behavior. I'm not minimizing it. But labeling it as an isolated incident rather than a pattern is important. We wouldn't want to escalate something unnecessarily before fully understanding. Escalate? Emily's mother cut her off, her voice rising now, no longer containing the fury that had been simmering beneath the surface. My daughter was assaulted in your classroom. A child took scissors, school property, mind you, and cut her hair against her will. She's been harassed, humiliated, and mentally abused since the moment she walked through your doors. And you're sitting here trying to frame it as some learning opportunity? Mrs. Henderson stiffened, her expression shifting to that careful neutrality that people in positions of power often adopted when confronted. Mrs. Johnson, I understand you're upset. No. Her mother interrupted, her words a whip crack. You don't understand. But you will. Emily watched, heart pounding, as her mother leaned forward, planting her hands firmly on the principal's desk. I am not leaving this office until I know exactly what this school intends to do about the students who have targeted my daughter. I want written documentation of every report made, every disciplinary action taken, or not taken, against these girls. And if you think for 1 second that I won't escalate this to the school board, to the district superintendent, or to the media, then you are sorely mistaken. Mrs. Henderson's jaw tightened, and for the first time, cracks appeared in her carefully managed facade. Her fingers tightened around her pen, her shoulders tensing. With all due respect, Mrs. Johnson, involving outside parties could harm the reputation of this school and its students. These matters are best handled internally. Emily's stomach twisted. There it was, the truth beneath the polished words. It was never really about protecting the students. It was about protecting the image, the reputation, the facade of a perfect school where nothing truly bad ever happened. So your priority is the school's reputation? Her mother said flatly, her voice icy. Of my child. Not the safety. Mrs. Henderson shifted in her seat, clearly realizing the trap she had walked into. What I'm saying. That's not. Oh, it's exactly what you're saying. Her mother shot back. Emily sat frozen, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Part of her wanted to shrink into the upholstery, to disappear. But another part, a louder part, felt a surge of pride watching her mother stand so fiercely in her defense. Mrs. Henderson took a slow breath, trying to regain control of the conversation. I will open an internal investigation. I will speak with the students involved. Naturally, disciplinary action will depend on the findings. The findings, her mother repeated, aghast. Classroom full of students who saw what happened. You have multiple eyewitnesses. You have a Witness accounts can be unreliable. Mrs. Henderson replied carefully. Sometimes exaggerate or misinterpret. Young people. Emily couldn't stay silent any longer. Her voice cracked as it broke free. Misinterpret. She grabbed scissors. She cut my hair. In front of everyone. There's nothing to. Mrs. Henderson's gaze shifted to her, and for a brief moment, a flicker of genuine discomfort crossed her face before being quickly masked. Emily, I'm truly sorry for your distress. We will absolutely address this. But you must understand that. No. Emily interrupted, surprising even herself with the strength behind the word. Excuses. No more pretending it's not that bad. No more. Her mother placed a hand on her back, a small gesture of support, but let her speak. Emily's voice shook, but she pushed forward anyway. You can pretend this is normal. You can. Pretend that it's just middle school drama or whatever excuse you need to sleep at night. But this isn't normal. This isn't okay. And if you don't do something, then we will. We'll tell everyone. Because I'm done being quiet. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mrs. Henderson's expression faltered, her mouth pressing into a thin line. The tension in the room crackled like electricity, each second stretching painfully long. Finally, Mrs. Henderson sighed, her voice strained. Very well. I will arrange meetings with the students involved and their parents. We'll also conduct a formal review of classroom supervision. During the incident, Emily's mother arched a brow. That's a start. But it's not enough. I want assurance that my daughter will be safe in this school. That this won't happen again. Mrs. Henderson hesitated. Counseling. Of course. We'll set up a mediation. And perhaps counseling. Emily's mother snapped. The victim? For who? The bullies or my daughter, who's already? For everyone involved. Mrs. Henderson replied stiffly, her hands folding tightly together. Important to foster understanding and reconciliation among students. It's. Emily stared at her, her stomach churning. Understanding. Reconciliation. As if Madison slicing through her hair was just a minor dispute that could be solved by sitting in a circle and sharing feelings. Her mother stood, her chair scraping sharply against the floor. No. You don't get to frame this as a misunderstanding between equals. This is targeted harassment. This is abuse. And we're not playing by your rules anymore. The implication hung heavy in the air: comply, or risk being labeled as the problem. Emily's mother leveled her with a glare so sharp it could cut steel. Be coming alone. We'll be back. And we won't. Without waiting for a response, she guided Emily out of the office, the door clicking shut behind them. The hallway outside felt brighter, less suffocating, but the tension still lingered in the pit of Emily's stomach. As they walked toward the exit, Emily felt her mother's hand squeeze hers. Mother said softly but fiercely. Not even close. This isn't over. Her. And for the first time since the nightmare had begun, Emily believed her. The next morning carried a different weight. No longer was it just about surviving another day inside the suffocating walls of Maplewood Middle School. Now, it was about something more. About pushing back. About forcing the truth into the light where no one could ignore it anymore. Emily barely slept the night before. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind was relentless, cycling between fear and resolve. Her mother had spent the evening making phone calls, first to the school district, then to the superintendent's office. She drafted emails. attaching Emily's written statement along with a detailed timeline of events. Every word was precise. Every sentence was designed to ensure that no one could pretend ignorance anymore. But what neither of them expected was what happened next. It started with Sarah. That morning, as Emily walked into school with her head low but her back straighter than it had been in days, Sarah was already waiting by her locker. Her arms were crossed tightly, but her expression carried a fire that Emily had never seen before. "Emily," she said, her voice low but steady. "There's something you should know." Emily's heart lurched, bracing for bad news, but Sarah wasn't there to deliver more pain. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in closer. "People, they're talking. Everyone saw what happened. Some of them recorded it." Emily blinked. "What?" Sarah nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. "I heard. Tyler from science class. He had his phone out. He recorded the whole thing. Madison, the scissors. Everything." For a moment, Emily could only stare, her mind scrambling to process what that meant. The memories of that day came flooding back, the shock, the laughter, the horror, but the idea that someone had captured it, documented it, changed everything. Sarah bit her lip, lowering her voice further. "And, it's not just him. Other people saw it too. They didn't say anything then, but I think they feel guilty. Some of them are talking about coming forward." Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Are you serious?" Sarah nodded. "Teachers found out too. Tyler posted it on his private story. People saw it. A lot of people. I think the..." As if on cue, the usual hum of hallway chatter was pierced by sudden, sharp voices coming from down the corridor. A cluster of students stood near the main office, craning their necks toward something on one of their phones. Murmurs passed rapidly from person to person, their faces flickering between disbelief, excitement, and something else, something that looked suspiciously like fear. Emily's stomach twisted. The video. It was real. The truth wasn't just words anymore, it was undeniable, visible, impossible to ignore. Before she could process further, a familiar voice echoed from behind. Well, if it isn't Rapunzel's ugly stepsister. Madison." Emily turned slowly, her fists tightening at her sides. Madison stood a few paces away, arms crossed, flanked by Chloe and Ashley. But something was different this time. The usual smugness in Madison's face was strained. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the growing crowd of students. Chloe nudged her, whispering something quickly under her breath. Ashley glanced toward her phone and paled visibly. Madison squared her shoulders, trying to recover her usual posture of dominance. "What?" she snapped at Chloe, her voice losing its steady edge. "It's nothing. Nobody cares." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Across the hallway, Mr. Reynolds emerged from his classroom, a deep frown etched into his face. His eyes scanned the crowd, then locked onto Madison and Emily. He started walking toward them, his steps quick and heavy. "Office," he said sharply. "All of you. Now." Madison opened her mouth to argue but caught herself. Her lips pressed into a tight line, and for the first time, the Queen of Maplewood Middle looked cornered. Emily followed silently, Sarah close behind, their footsteps echoing down the hallway toward the principal's office. When they arrived, Mrs. Henderson was already waiting. Her face was pale, her hands gripping a stack of papers that trembled slightly as she placed them on the desk. Her usual rehearsed smile was gone, replaced by something brittle and panicked. "Sit," she instructed, her voice tighter than usual. The air in the room felt suffocating. Madison slumped into a chair, arms crossed, her foot tapping anxiously against the floor. Chloe and Ashley hovered behind her, casting nervous glances toward one another, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to tell them how this would end. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat, her gaze flickering toward the laptop open on her desk. A video played on the screen, muted, but unmistakable. The frozen image showed Madison mid-swing, scissors in hand, Emily's hair caught in her grip. The principal's voice was cold. "I've received substantial evidence regarding the incident that took place in science class. Multiple students have come forward. Several videos have surfaced." Madison's jaw clenched. It's not what it looks like." Mrs. Henderson snapped her head toward her, her professional mask slipping entirely. "Not what it looks like. You are clearly seen holding scissors. You are clearly seen cutting another student's hair without consent. And then laughing about it." Ashley shifted uncomfortably, whispering to Chloe. We didn't think." "Enough." Mrs. Henderson interrupted, raising a hand sharply. "This is not a conversation about what you did or did not think. This is about what you did." Emily sat stiffly, her heart hammering, but a strange calm settled over her. The worst had already happened. The humiliation, the pain, the isolation. But now, for the first time, the truth was louder than the silence. The door opened, and two more figures stepped in, her mother and the superintendent of the school district, Mr. Carter, a stern man in a dark suit whose presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. "I've reviewed the footage," Mr. Carter said without preamble, his voice devoid of emotion. "The statement submitted by multiple witnesses. This is a clear violation of district policy. Not only bullying but physical assault. And..." Madison's face drained of color. Chloe whimpered quietly. Ashley sat with her arms folded, lips pressed tightly together, as if regretting every choice that led her to this moment. Mr. Carter continued, his gaze sharp as steel. "Effective immediately, Madison, Chloe, and Ashley are suspended pending further review. There will also be mandatory meetings with your parents, and recommendations for further disciplinary action are being prepared. This may include long-term suspension or expulsion." Madison's composure finally cracked. Her eyes welled, her hands shaking. "Mom's on the school board. You can't." Mr. Carter's eyes didn't even flinch. "Unacceptable. And it ends now. That has no bearing on the facts. What you did is..." Emily's mother exhaled slowly, her grip tightening protectively on Emily's shoulder. Murmured, barely loud enough for only Emily to hear. "Finally. She..." Mrs. Henderson sank back in her chair, her face ashen. Her earlier attempts to dismiss the situation had collapsed entirely under the weight of undeniable proof. Mr. Carter looked at Emily directly for the first time. His voice softened, just slightly. "To know, we are deeply sorry this was allowed to happen. It never should have. I want you." Emily nodded stiffly, her throat tightening. For a moment, words failed her. But beneath the tremor in her hands and the pounding of her heart, something solid began to take root, the unshakable truth that her voice mattered. That speaking out, no matter how terrifying, had power. The silence that had once been her enemy was broken. And this time, it was broken by truth. The news traveled faster than anyone could have predicted. By the time the final bell rang that day, whispers had become conversations, and conversations had erupted into full-blown discussions that echoed down every hallway, across the cafeteria, and even onto the athletic fields. Teachers tried and failed to maintain order. Students huddled together in groups, phones in hand, refreshing their feeds, waiting for more updates. The video had leaked far beyond Tyler's private story. Someone had screen recorded it, shared it, and within hours, it had spread across the entire student body and even into the town's local community groups online. Parents were messaging the school. Some were outraged. Others were horrified. A few were just grateful, relieved that it hadn't been their child sitting in Emily's place. The following morning, the tension was no longer subtle. A mass email had been sent to all parents and guardians late the night before, informing them of an emergency assembly being held in the school auditorium. Attendance was mandatory for every student, every parent of those directly involved, and every faculty member. When Emily arrived that morning, her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might split her ribcage. She walked through the front doors flanked by her mother on one side and Sarah on the other. The stares were different now. Not filled with mockery. Not pity either. It was something more complicated, a mix of guilt, curiosity, and something close to respect. The auditorium was packed. Rows of seats overflowed with students and parents. Teachers lined the walls, their faces grim and uneasy. On stage sat Mrs. Henderson, the superintendent, Mr. Carter, several members of the school board, and a counselor whose presence seemed more symbolic than useful. On one side of the front row sat Madison, Chloe, and Ashley with their parents. Madison's mother, a sharp-faced woman dressed in an expensive suit, sat rigid with her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a hard line of disdain. Madison, in contrast, looked nothing like the queen of the school she had once been. Her face was pale, her hands twisted nervously in her lap. Chloe slumped low in her chair, her arms folded, her leg bouncing furiously. Ashley sat stiffly, eyes glassy, lips trembling as though one wrong word might cause her to break entirely. On the opposite side sat Emily and her mother, Sarah seated beside them like an anchor of quiet support. Other parents dotted the rows behind them, whispering among themselves, their gazes flicking between the students involved, the administrators, and the looming stage where decisions would be made. When the microphone crackled to life, Mr. Carter stood, adjusting his glasses. His voice echoed through the vast room, steady and precise. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. What brings us here today is not just an unfortunate incident, but a violation of this school's core values, a failure in judgment, and a breach of trust in the safety we promise to every student who walks through these doors. The murmurs quieted instantly. Every pair of eyes in the room locked onto him. The events that occurred in this school, specifically in one of our classrooms, were captured not just in student reports but on video. A video that has circulated widely. Let me be perfectly clear. What took place was not harmless teasing. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not kids being kids. It was bullying, harassment, and physical assault. Gasps echoed across the room. Parents shifted uncomfortably. Some students lowered their eyes. Others sat straighter, their faces tightening with either fear or realization. Madison's mother stood abruptly, her voice sharp. Targeted unfairly. This is a gross exaggeration. This is ridiculous. My daughter has been. Mr. Carter didn't flinch. His gaze pinned her where she stood. The video speaks for itself. Ma'am. Your daughter, along with her two peers, engaged in an act that humiliated, degraded, and physically violated another student in front of a classroom full of witnesses. Before Madison's mother could reply, Mrs. Henderson spoke, her voice far weaker than usual. Our priority is the well-being of all our students. However, it's also important that we consider all sides of what happened. Emily's mother stood, her voice slicing clean through the air. Attacked in a classroom. What side of that is there to consider? All sides. My daughter was. A ripple of agreement moved through the parents in the audience. Several nodded. A few whispered affirmations under their breath. The counselor stepped forward then, clearing her throat. We believe it's important to hear from the students involved, both to foster accountability and to help the community understand the weight of what's occurred. A hush fell over the auditorium. All heads turned toward Madison, Chloe, and Ashley. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Chloe bit her lip, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Ashley stared down at her lap, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Madison sat frozen, jaw tight, hands clenched into fists so tight her knuckles were white. Finally, Madison shifted forward, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to get that bad. Her mother hissed, tugging her sleeve. Do not say another word. But Madison shook her off. No, I'm done. Everyone's staring at me like I'm some kind of monster, but none of you ever asked why. The audience held its breath. Madison's voice trembled. You all think I'm some perfect, spoiled kid. But you don't know what it's like, at home. You don't know what it's like having a mom who treats you like you're her property. Who screams if you're not perfect. Who tells you every day that you're nothing if you're not better than everyone else. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Madison pressed on, words spilling like a dam breaking. Yeah. I bullied Emily. I did. I was horrible. I thought, if I could make someone else smaller, then maybe I wouldn't feel so worthless all the time. Her voice cracked, and she wiped furiously at her eyes. It doesn't make it okay. I know that. I know that. Silence filled the auditorium, a different kind of silence now. Heavy. Complicated. Mrs. Henderson sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene. Mr. Carter cleared his throat, his voice firm but gentler now. While understanding context is important, it does not excuse the behavior. It does not erase the harm caused. He turned to Emily. Emily, would you like to say anything? The weight of the room shifted. All eyes landed on her. Emily stood slowly, knees trembling but refusing to buckle. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but clear. I didn't come here to destroy anyone. I didn't come here to ruin anyone's life. I just wanted it to stop. I just wanted someone to say it wasn't okay. That what happened to me wasn't my fault. She took a breath, glancing around the sea of faces. For weeks, I felt invisible. Or, worse. I felt like I deserved it because nobody did anything. Not the teachers. Not the students. Nobody. Her gaze drifted to Madison, Chloe, and Ashley. You permission to hurt other people. Ever. But I also know that being hurt doesn't give. A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd again, quieter this time, but undeniable. Mr. Carter stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room. This school, this community, has a responsibility. Not just to punish bad behavior, but to prevent it. To create a culture where this doesn't happen again. He paused. And it starts with all of us. Disciplinary action is being taken. But this conversation isn't over. It starts today. The auditorium sat in stunned silence as the weight of those words settled over them. For the first time since arriving at Maplewood, Emily realized something: sometimes, the truth wasn't enough to stop the hurt. But it was enough to make sure the hurt wasn't ignored. And sometimes, that was where real change began. The day after the assembly carried an eerie quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that used to follow Emily through the hallways, but something different. Something thoughtful. Something uncertain. It was the silence of a community trying to figure out what came next after being forced to confront the uncomfortable truths they had ignored for far too long. Madison, Chloe, and Ashley were absent. Their lockers stood closed and untouched, stripped of their decorations, their usual crowd dispersed like leaves in the wind. Their absence was palpable, leaving a hollow space in the social fabric of Maplewood Middle that no one quite knew how to navigate. Walking through those same hallways felt surreal. Students who once avoided eye contact now glanced her way with expressions that hovered somewhere between guilt and curiosity. A few even offered hesitant nods, some whispering a quiet "hey" as she passed, awkward, unsure. But real in a way it had never been before. Emily didn't entirely know what to do with that shift. It was strange, unsettling even, but not unwelcome. In homeroom, the tension that had once been a constant undercurrent was replaced by something heavier: reflection. The teacher cleared his throat awkwardly before beginning roll call, as if unsure whether acknowledging the elephant in the room would make it vanish or grow larger. Sarah slid into the seat next to Emily with a small, hesitant smile. "We survived," she whispered. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Yeah. We did." But the day didn't pass without tension. Rumors floated in every corner, about what consequences the three girls would face, about whether the school was really going to change, or whether this was just temporary theater until everything went back to how it was before. It wasn't until third period that everything truly shifted. The announcement came over the loudspeaker, a rare event, and one that immediately silenced every classroom. "Attention students and staff." Mrs. Henderson's voice began, shaky but resolute. "As part of our school's commitment to ensuring a safe and respectful environment for everyone, effective immediately, Maplewood Middle will be implementing new anti-bullying protocols. This includes mandatory workshops for students and staff, anonymous reporting channels, and the formation of a student-led committee focused on peer support and prevention." There was a beat of stunned silence across the room. Sarah blinked, leaning toward Emily. Did that just happen?" Emily could only nod, her heart pounding. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't finished. "Additionally, a restorative meeting will be held this week involving all parties affected by the recent events. Participation is voluntary, but encouraged. More information will be provided during homeroom tomorrow." The announcement clicked off, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and a buzz of murmured conversation. As the day unfolded, more details trickled in. Madison, Chloe, and Ashley had been suspended for 2 weeks, with further review pending. But beyond suspension, the school was requiring them to attend counseling sessions, both individually and as part of a group. The same was being offered to Emily, not as punishment, but as support. And for the first time, the school wasn't just focusing on punishment. They were focusing on change. It wasn't perfect. Some students still whispered. Some still scoffed, rolling their eyes as if the entire thing was an overreaction. But others, more than Emily expected, actually seemed to care. During lunch, something happened that Emily would have never imagined even a week ago. A girl named Haley, someone who had always floated near the edges of Madison's circle but never fully part of it, walked up to her table, the table she now shared with Sarah. "Hey," Haley said, fiddling nervously with the strap of her bag. I wanted to say. I'm sorry. For not saying anything before. For laughing. For everything." Emily blinked, stunned into silence. Haley bit her lip, glancing down. "I know it doesn't mean much now. But I should have said something. And I didn't. I was scared. And that's not an excuse." Sarah stared, wide-eyed, just as shocked as Emily. For a long, heavy moment, Emily didn't know what to say. A part of her wanted to lash out, to say it was too little, too late. But another part, a bigger part, remembered what it felt like to be crushed by silence. To be left alone. "It does mean something," Emily said quietly. "It really does." Haley let out a shaky breath, nodding quickly before retreating back toward her usual table. But not without glancing back once, offering a small, uncertain smile. By the time the day ended, the atmosphere in the hallways had shifted even further. Posters had already gone up on the bulletin boards, bright, colorful signs about the new student committee, about anti-bullying pledges, about ways to stand up instead of stand by. But the biggest surprise came that evening. Emily and her mother were sitting at the kitchen table when her mom's phone buzzed. Her mother glanced at the screen, her eyebrows knitting in confusion. "It's Madison's mom," she said slowly. Emily's stomach dropped. "What?" her mother answered, placing the call on speaker. The voice on the other end was brittle, strained, but softer than either of them expected. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Stephanie Clark. Madison's mother. I wanted to apologize." Silence hung heavy for a moment. I didn't realize," she continued, voice cracking. I knew Madison had her issues. I knew she was difficult. But I didn't know how much of it, how much of me, she was carrying into that school." Emily stared at the phone, stunned. This was the same woman who had tried to shut down the assembly, who had sneered at them from across the auditorium. I'm getting help," Mrs. Clark continued, stumbling over the words. "And Madison. She wanted me to tell you, she's sorry. She's not ready to say it herself. Not yet. But she will. I promise." Emily's mother glanced at Emily, her eyes softening. "Means something. Thank you," she said carefully. That. When the call ended, Emily sat in silence, her mind spinning. She didn't know what to do with the complicated knot of emotions swirling inside her. Anger. Relief. Confusion. Hope. All tangled together. But one thing was clear, this was more than she ever thought possible. Not forgiveness yet. Not closure. But maybe, the beginning of something close. That night, Emily stood in front of her bathroom mirror. Her hair was still uneven, still bore the marks of what had been done. But as she traced her fingers over the strands, she realized something. It wasn't just broken anymore. It was growing back. The following week unfolded like nothing anyone in Maplewood Middle had ever witnessed before. The school, once known for quietly brushing uncomfortable issues under the rug, had been forced into the spotlight. It was no longer possible to pretend that the problems could be ignored. The truth had cracked open the surface, and now everyone had to face what lay beneath. The student body buzzed with tension, curiosity, and unease as the changes began. Gone were the days when teachers could pretend not to hear the cruel whispers in the hallways. Gone were the days when silence was the easiest choice. Now, silence felt like complicity, and for the first time, people were starting to understand what that meant. Madison, Chloe, and Ashley remained suspended, but behind the scenes, more was happening. The school board conducted a thorough investigation, not just into the single incident with the scissors but into the broader culture that had allowed it to happen in the first place. Reports surfaced from other students who had endured similar cruelty over the years, some anonymously, others brave enough to attach their names. Emily watched the transformation unfold with a strange mixture of emotions. A part of her still struggled with the heaviness of what had happened, the humiliation, the betrayal, the pain. But another part, stronger now, recognized the power that had come from speaking out, from refusing to let her voice be drowned by fear. The newly formed student-led committee held its first meeting on Thursday after school. Emily wasn't sure whether she wanted to go. The idea of sitting in a room talking about bullying felt almost surreal after everything she had endured. But Sarah nudged her gently at lunch. "You should come," Sarah said quietly. "You were the one brave enough to make it start. Not because you have to fix anything, but because." So, Emily went. The meeting was held in the library, where tables had been pushed together into a circle. About a dozen students sat there, some victims of bullying, others allies who wanted to be part of the change. A counselor facilitated, but the students did most of the talking. When it came time for introductions, Emily's voice wavered but did not break. "I'm Emily," she said softly. "And I guess I'm here because I know what happens when nobody speaks up. And I don't want anyone else to feel that alone." The nods around the table were genuine. For the first time, Emily saw faces not filled with judgment but with understanding. It was a small step, but it felt enormous. Meanwhile, Madison, Chloe, and Ashley weren't left untouched by the fallout. Their suspensions were extended, followed by a mandatory participation in a restorative justice program. It was not just about punishment, it was about forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions directly. Emily was given the option to participate in a mediated session with them. Her first instinct was to refuse. The thought of sitting across from them, of looking Madison in the eye, made her stomach twist. But after talking it over with her mother and Sarah, she decided she wouldn't let fear have the last word. The day of the mediation arrived, and Emily walked into the counselor's office with her hands clenched into tight fists, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Madison was already there, sitting stiffly in a chair, her hands twisting in her lap. Chloe and Ashley sat on either side of her, both visibly nervous, their usual bravado stripped away. The counselor explained the process. Each person would have a chance to speak, to listen, to try and understand. Madison was the first to speak. Her voice was thin, brittle, but her eyes didn't carry the sharpness they once had. I don't even know where to start," she began, her gaze flickering toward Emily but not quite meeting it. "I was horrible. I know that. I knew it even while I was doing it, but I don't think I really understood how bad it was until everything blew up." She swallowed hard. "I was angry. At everything. My mom, my life, myself. And I took it out on you. Because you were new. Because you didn't fight back. Because it was easier. Then dealing with my own mess. Chloe spoke next, her voice shaking. I followed her. I laughed. I thought it was just a joke. But, watching that video, hearing everyone talk about it, it wasn't a joke. It never was. Ashley's voice was barely a whisper. Her, scared of being her target instead. I didn't think. I just went along with it. I was scared of. The counselor nodded gently and then turned to Emily. Said softly. But if you want to, this is your space. You don't have to say anything. Emily's hands trembled in her lap. For a moment, she thought she wouldn't be able to speak. But when her voice came, it was stronger than she expected. I don't think you really understand what you did. She said quietly. You didn't just cut my hair. You cut my safety. My trust. My ability to believe that people could be kind. Her eyes met Madison's, steady and unflinching. You made me afraid to walk into this school. Every day. You made me feel like I didn't matter. Like I was nothing. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Anne. I won't let you take that away from me. But I do matter. I always did. The room sat in heavy silence, the words lingering in the air like a storm that had finally broken. The counselor nodded slowly. That was powerful. And true. The mediation didn't magically fix everything. It didn't erase the pain or undo the damage. But it planted something. A seed. A beginning. When Emily walked out of that room, she felt lighter. Not because everything was solved, but because she had faced it. Looked it in the eye. And walked away stronger. The school's new policies went into full effect within the next 2 weeks. Teachers received training on intervention. Students attended workshops where they role-played how to stand up instead of stand by. Anonymous reporting boxes were placed in every hallway, and a new counselor was hired, specifically focused on peer relations and conflict resolution. Emily's story spread beyond Maplewood. Local news stations picked it up. A few national outlets ran articles about it, not about the scandal, but about the change. About how one girl's courage forced a school to reckon with its own silence. At home, Emily's mother stood taller, prouder. She had always been fierce in her love for Emily. But now that fierceness was matched by a community beginning to understand what real support looked like. As for Sarah, their friendship grew deeper. No longer were they two quiet girls hiding at the edges of the cafeteria. They were leaders now, not because they had asked to be, but because they had proven what was possible when silence was broken. And Emily, for the first time since arriving in Maplewood, she began to believe that maybe this place could be more than a nightmare. Maybe it could become a home. Not because it was perfect, but because now, at least, it was trying. The morning sun shone differently now through Emily's bedroom window. It no longer felt like the oppressive glare of another day she had to survive, but rather a quiet, gentle reminder that life was moving forward, not in the shadow of what had happened but in the light of what had changed. Standing in front of her mirror, Emily took a deep breath. Her hair, still shorter than it had been when she arrived in Maplewood, framed her face in a way that felt less like something broken and more like something chosen. The jagged edges were gone, replaced by a stylish bob that her mother had helped her get after everything unfolded. It wasn't just a haircut. It was a decision. A symbol that her story wasn't about what had been taken from her but about what she had reclaimed. As she tied the laces of her sneakers, her phone buzzed with a notification. A message from Sarah. Meet me by the front gate. Big day. Emily smiled, grabbed her backpack, and headed downstairs. Her mother was waiting in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in one hand, a warm smile on her face. "First day of the new you," her mother said gently. "First day of all of us," Emily corrected, her voice soft but firm. The walk to school no longer felt like marching toward a battlefield. Instead, it felt like walking toward possibility, toward something better. Sarah was already waiting at the front gate, her sketchbook tucked under one arm, her other hand waving energetically as Emily approached. "You ready?" Sarah asked, her grin wide, infectious. Emily nodded. "Yeah. More than ready." The school grounds were buzzing, but not with the same cruel undercurrent that had once defined them. Instead, there was a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. Students milled around the new bulletin board installed right outside the main entrance, one covered in posters about the peer-led kindness initiative, volunteer opportunities, and resources for anyone feeling isolated or mistreated. Near the center was a large banner that read in bold letters, "It starts with us." The committee Emily and Sarah had joined, and eventually helped lead, was officially launching its anti-bullying campaign. Today was the first assembly where they would present it. Not as victims, but as leaders. Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere was electric. Rows of students filled the seats, buzzing with curiosity, whispering in pockets. Teachers lined the walls, administrators hovered near the stage, and parents of students on the committee sat in the front row. When Emily's name was called to the stage, her legs trembled, but her steps were steady. As she reached the podium, she scanned the sea of faces. For a brief, sharp moment, she spotted Madison, seated near the back. Madison's face was guarded, but no longer hostile. There was no defiance there now, only something quieter. Reflection. Maybe even regret. Emily took a breath and began. "When I first walked into this school, I thought I was invisible. Or maybe I hoped I was. But what I learned is that being invisible doesn't keep you safe. It doesn't stop people from hurting you. It only means that when they do, no one sees it." Her voice didn't shake. "Not this time. For weeks, I felt like I didn't belong here. I felt like no one cared if I was okay. And for a while, I believed that maybe I didn't deserve to belong." She paused, scanning the crowd. Not one person looked away. But I was wrong. Because what happened wasn't about me being different. It was about how easy it is for all of us to look the other way. To tell ourselves it's not our problem. To let silence be the answer. Emily's hands tightened on the podium, not from fear but from strength. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just tells the people hurting others that they can keep going. It tells the people being hurt that they don't matter. She glanced at Sarah, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. "I don't want anyone else to ever feel the way I did. That's why we're here. That's why this matters. Because standing by and watching is no longer an option. Because it starts with us." Applause started, hesitant at first, then building, rising until it filled the auditorium like a wave. Emily stepped back, her cheeks flushing, not with embarrassment but with pride. One by one, other students from the committee spoke, sharing stories, offering resources. Outlining how students could anonymously report harassment, how peer support groups would be held weekly, how there would now be designated safe spaces around campus for anyone who needed them. When the assembly ended, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the usual scramble to the doors, students lingered. Conversations sparked. People who had never spoken to each other before started talking, about the assembly, about their own experiences, about how things needed to change not just in theory but in practice. At lunch, Emily and Sarah sat at their usual table, but it was no longer just theirs. Haley joined them, her shy smile genuine as she unpacked her lunch. Then Ethan, the quiet boy from science class, hesitantly asked if he could sit too. Soon, their table was full, not with the loudest, most popular kids, but with the ones who had realized that kindness could be louder than cruelty. As the day ended, Emily stopped by her locker and found something waiting there. A small, folded piece of paper taped gently to the door. Her heart raced for a moment, fear flickering, old instincts dying hard. But when she unfolded it, her breath caught. Written in neat, careful handwriting were the words. "Thank you for being brave. You made me realize I don't have to be afraid anymore." There was no name. No signature. Just those words. And they were enough. Walking home that day, Emily felt the weight that had pressed against her chest for so long finally lift. The memories of what had happened didn't vanish, they never would. But they didn't define her anymore. She had been the new girl. She had been the girl they laughed at, the girl they humiliated, the girl they tried to break. But now, she was something else. She was the girl who stood up. The girl who fought back. The girl who reminded everyone, including herself, that even in the darkest moments, even when it feels like no one sees you, you are never truly invisible. You are never truly alone. Because change doesn't start with everyone. It starts with one. And one is always enough.